to try. So this is my 3-minute bio. And if any of you guys snoring keeps me awake, I'll stop. I was born August the 6th, 1945 at Emory Hospital in Decatur. My dad was a career soldier. We lived all over the world. I attended the first couple of years of high school in Athens, Greece. Ended up graduating in Fayetteville, North Carolina. My dad was leaping out of airplanes at that time in the 82nd. I graduated from North Georgia College in 1967. I was commissioned armor. I attended the Armor Officer Basic Course in Ranger School and then went to Germany. I served as a scout platoon leader in the 1st Battalion, 32nd Armor for 1 year, which was 67 and 68, and I was involuntarily curtailed and sent to Vietnam. I did 2 tours in Vietnam. The first tour I was assigned to the 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry, 1st Infantry Division, and that was 1969 and 70. Initially, I was a platoon leader in A Troop for about 4 months. I got promoted to captain. I was made the Squadron S4, and that lasted about 6 weeks. The B Troop commander got killed, and I was the only captain in the rear that had any experience in the field with the squadron. And we were making a lot of contact. So the old man said he didn't want to send somebody out there for OJT. So I went back out and I took B Troop and stayed with them for the rest of that tour. I attended the Infantry Officer Advanced Course. See, they found out I couldn't read, so they sent me to the infantry school. And while I was there, I sat with a bunch of aviators. And I see, at this time, there was not an aviation branch in the Army. So being an aviator was like being a paratrooper or being, it was an additional skill set. So I sat with a bunch of infantry aviators. Now, when I got back from Vietnam, I weighed 142 pounds. I had leech bites and crap still on my leg. You know how they leeches put that stuff in your blood so you bleed for a while. I still had bleeding leech bites when I got back. And I sat with a bunch of aviators. They seat you alphabetically. And these guys, they had more money than they knew what to do with. They were partying all the time. And I said, there may be a better way to do this. So I took that, aptitude test for flight school and passed that. And then I cheated my way through a flight physical because I can't hear out of one ear. I discharged my weapon in a tunnel one day. And so anyway, I cheated my way through the flight physical, got to flight school, got through flight school, which is, and I've told a lot of you guys this, give a monkey enough bananas, you can teach him to do anything. And I'm living proof of that. So I got through flight school, I got a Cobra transition out of flight school, and then I went back to Vietnam again. So I was with the 1st Aviation Brigade, started out with Charlie Troop, 3rd Squadron, 17th Cav. They were out of Vinh Long at that time down in the Delta, and I was flying guns with them, and I flew guns for about 2 months, and they went home, and I moved over to a slick unit, the 18th Corps Aviation Company in Canto, and I flew slicks with them for several months, and then I got tagged to go up to 1st Aviation Brigade headquarters to work in the G3 shop. The problem was I was a captain when I went. I didn't have enough rank to even be a platoon leader because there were so many captains in aviation units. So I was basically doing a warrant officer's job, driving, as an aircraft commander, but that's what I was. So they found this thing up at 1st Aviation Brigade that was actually a captain's slot, and that's where I ended up. My job at 1st Aviation Brigade was I was the Operational Report Lessons Learned Officer, which was kind of an interesting job to have. This was during the spring offensive of 1972, 72. And that's when the bad guys brought down the shoulder-fired heat-seeking missile. And they brought down a lot of sophisticated anti-aircraft artillery and that sort of thing. And so the commanding general of the 1st Aviation Brigade was a guy named McKinnon. He wanted to be sure that the units, especially the units that were up in I Corps where a lot of this stuff was, they were doing what they could to survive. You get above the High Van Pass, you don't go above 25 feet altitude was one way to survive. So he wanted to be sure that we were capturing these lessons learned in a high-intensity anti-aircraft environment, and that was my job. And I spent, about a month and a half flying with every unit up in I Corps and just writing down kind of what they did, and then I came back and wrote a report about that. Okay, so after Vietnam, I was an Armor Infantry Tactics instructor at the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which was a great job because the artillery guys didn't care what we did. If you weren't artillery at Fort Sill, you weren't doo-doo, you know? I mean, that was just the way it was. So, I mean, I used to give away beer in my classes. Yep, I mean, and they didn't care. I mean, we got away with it. Anyway, I got selected for graduate school. This is, again, give a monkey enough bananas, you can teach him to do anything. And they sent me to Georgia State University to get a master's degree in information systems. Now, if they had sent me to get a degree in anything that I knew something about, they would have sent me to phys ed. But as it turned out, anyway, so I got an IS degree, and then in the Army, they have what they call a utilization tour. So my utilization tour was with the Worldwide Military Command and Control System called WMIX. And what that is, it's an intercomputer network, and this was kind of an early, this was where, you know, packet switch technology and all this stuff that happens on the internet, this is kind of where that got pioneered. There was a thing called ARPA, which is something research projects, something. Anyway, this was kind of the parent. I know Al Gore really made the internet, but this was kind of the parent for the internet. And it was an intercomputer network of like 37 mainframe computers. And y'all, I guess anybody that remember we used to have the thing called the Unit Readiness Report, the DA 2715 or whatever it was. Well, all of that information goes into WMIX. And that's how the Joint Chiefs of Staff knows the status of all the different units. Also, WMIX is where the war plans are run out of. So again, I mean, it's a really important network. You have to have a top secret clearance to get into it, which I got one, so anybody can get one. Okay, 6 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry. I was talking to Cary King before, and he said he could do it in 7. So anyway, all right. So so I left active duty and went into the USAR in 1981. And I got mobilized in 1989 and sent to the desert to, guess what, take WMIX to the desert in Saudi Arabia, and that's what I did. And we got there early in August, and we ran the war plan that basically they deployed all the units over on. So it was kind of interesting. My last assignment in the reserves was in the 81st ARCOM. I worked for David Bockel. I was his DESM. And David was the chief of staff at that time. And then David gave me the opportunity to command a garrison support unit for Fort Bragg. And I did that my last 4 years in the reserves. I retired as a colonel in 1998. I had over 31 years service, 14 active and 17 USAR. I joined a computer tax software company up in Rome, Georgia, and worked for them for about 13 years. I was married to a lovely lady named Carol for 46 years. And we had 3 kids and 4 grandkids, and she would have loved to see her 2 great grandkids. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I'll be followed by Art Katz.
I didn't know that I was following Skip. That's a tough road to hoe. So first of all, Skip, thank you for all you do, and I will try to keep it at 5 minutes. I was born and raised in New York City, February 19th, 1942. Actually born in Manhattan. Went to high school in Levittown, Long Island. I am a second-generation Jewish American who never lived in a place that had a shower or a bathtub until I was age 11. Both my parents worked full-time, as is typical of first-generation children of immigrant parents. And if nothing else, I can say that I learned from my parents to work my butt off. And I can do that and will continue to do that as long as I'm around. I went to the United States Coast Guard Academy for free education. That was in 1959 that I started. It's the only service academy without a congressional appointment required in order to get in. Over 3,000 students, high school students, took the exam the same year that I did. 600 were accepted. 300 showed up on the first day. Within 2 months, 150 had gone, and there were 150 left, and we graduated in 92. That was in 1963. I have a BS in general engineering with honors. I was a 4 years varsity soccer player. I wrestled until a shoulder injury stopped me from wrestling. I married my wife Carol 4 days after graduation. She was 19, I was 21. We were engaged when she was 17 and I was 19. She was hot then, she's still hot. So, for all of you mathematicians, we will be married 60 years this coming June. Out of those 60 years, 7 or 8 were really good. Don't tell her I said that. When I graduated from the academy, I spent the next 4 years in the Coast Guard. That was my required mandatory service. Because the Coast Guard is a small outfit and runs lean and mean, if you will, you get responsibility very, very quickly. Within 2 years, I was the executive officer of an aids to navigation vessel working out of, or located in Staten Island, New York. Search and rescue, aids to navigation is buoys, lighthouses, all those things floating around in the water. And as a result of my aids to navigation specialty, I am extraordinarily capable of scraping seagull crap off of anything and everything that ever existed. On very, very short notice, I was assigned to be a gunboat officer in Vietnam. We converted 82-foot search and rescue vessels into seagoing attack boats, if you will. I had 550 caliber machine guns and 81 millimeter mortar. I was sent first to, I got my crew sent to the Philippines. There in the Philippines, my boat arrived on a freighter. They dropped it in the water. They put guns on it. They put communications, military communications on it. We trained for a month, and then we drove it to Vietnam and literally went on station patrolling the coast off the Mekong Delta and in the rivers of the Mekong Delta. People look at me and say, wow, that's really neat. And I said, no, think floating target. Not so neat. We were involved in multiple combat engagements. My major accomplishment, I think, is number one, we blew up the bad guys in every single engagement. And number two, I had 0 wounded in action or killed in action. The superstructure of my boat was made of aluminum. You could punch a hole in it with your fingernail if you used a lot of good hard stuff on your fingernail. So every time we were in an engagement, the boat looked like it had been shot through and through by a birdshot or something like that. I resigned from the Coast Guard after 4 years for multiple reasons, including what I will candidly say are political and religious. Anti-Semitism was not something that went very well or was very good for Jewish guys in the Coast Guard in 1967. I immediately entered manufacturing management, went to work for the Procter & Gamble company. After a couple of years, moved to the Estee Lauder company, first in New York and New Jersey. I knew I didn't want to be an engineer, and by the way, that engineering degree, if you ever see something that says bridge designed by Arthur Katz, don't go over it. I immediately knew that I needed to learn something about business, and I started at night at Rutgers University and went for 3 years, 3 hours a night, 3 nights a week to get an MBA on the GI Bill, and that helped me enormously with my career. In 1979, I moved to Atlanta with Carol and 3 daughters to be vice president and general manager of a company called Time Chemical down by the airport, and it had a wholly owned subsidiary called Custom Spray Products, and we made all the powder detergent for the Purex company, distributed all over the Southeast, and did several other things. Within a year of that move, I was promoted to a vice president position at the company's parent company up in Chicago, and my wife and I looked at one another and said, you know, our kids just kind of learned to say y'all, and we're not going north again. Ultimately, I resigned. We decided to make Atlanta our permanent home. After a little bit of what am I going to do next with my life, I purchased an executive recruiting franchise, grew it to a consistent top 15% office among more than 1,000 offices worldwide. I continued in that career until 2010, when I handed it off to one of my sons-in-law, and I phased out over the next 5 years, and I've been mostly retired since 2015. I still do an occasional search when somebody asks me to do it and it feels right. My daughters all settled within 3 miles of us in Dunwoody, Georgia. I am truly blessed to be intimately involved with all 7 of my grandkids, who are now ages 26 to 18. The youngest one just got into the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. So all my grandkids were born and grew up within 3 miles of me. I maintain a very high level of volunteering with nonprofits in the Veterans, Food Insecure, Dunwoody Township, and Jewish Peoplehood and nonprofit areas. I play tennis against much younger opponents on a very regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week. I love fishing. I love the water. I spent yesterday 6 hours in the rain with a group called the Veterans Fly Fishing Group, which I knew nothing about, but had the opportunity to learn about at the Veterans Fair that several of us volunteered for in Cobb County last summer. So out of volunteering for something, I got to go fishing in the rain yesterday, and it was terrific. Okay, miscellaneous things about me. My oldest daughter was born while I was in Vietnam. I met her when she was 4 months old in the jetway at Kennedy Airport. Kind of different from how most people meet their first child. My middle daughter was born at home, delivered by moi. If any of you have, I'm covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield. If you have grandchildren about to give birth, just let me know, no charge. My third daughter was born by appointment. She was induced because the doctor said, you're not having her at home, and we're not going through this again. I started a kids' soccer league in Dunwoody in 1980. It has grown to over 700 kids per year, and I love just going by the fields and watching them play. In 1958, I won a televised Ted Steele Teen Bandstand Dance Contest on WPIX TV, Channel 11 in New York City, and I still love to dance. I've sailed to Europe twice on a square rigger ship. That was part of my cadet training. I initiated the AVVBA new member orientation shortly after joining AVVBA, and I'm currently a member of the AVVBA strategic planning team, and it is just a great group of guys to work with. At age 60, I set a goal to be the state of Georgia singles tennis champion in the 80 and over category, and I was blessed to have that happen to me about a month and a half ago. No. Life is good. I know that I've been blessed, and with its most important joy, which is a beautiful, tight-knit family. The older I get, the better I was. And last but not least, I am honored to be a brother to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. John Butler, come on down.
So let's see how patient you are. And I really appreciate Santa coming today, just for me. I appreciate that. Thank you, Judge Santa. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Kansas, graduated from high school in 1963, and attended college in the same town. During World War II, my dad had worked on the railroad in freight and was exempt from military service, but all 7 of my uncles on both sides of the family served in World War II, Army, Army Air Corps, Navy, and Marines. So I knew I was going to Vietnam. So I stayed in our Army ROTC through college and was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant when I graduated. I completed my bachelor's and master's degrees in computer science before entering active duty. As a field artillery officer, a lieutenant, my first permanent duty assignment was to Germany, much to my surprise. I was a battalion recon and survey platoon leader for the 6th of the 40th, 8-inch self-propelled artillery battalion in the 3rd Armored Division based in Hanau. My first daughter, Julie, was born 27 days after I landed in Germany. I got my orders for Vietnam 3 days later. Thank you. I served in Vietnam during the 70 and 1971, first as a field artillery forward observer with the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and then as a battalion fire direction officer with the 2nd of the 94th 175 Heavy Artillery Battalion. At the end of my one-year tour of Vietnam, I was expecting a 4-month stateside assignment for my final permanent duty assignment so I could find a job and be ready to transition to post-military life. Instead, I was discharged from active duty and returned home as an unemployed father of a 14-month-old. My second daughter, Jane, was born exactly 9 months later, oddly enough. Fortunately, I got a job in the computer industry a few months after returning from Vietnam and started my 26-year career in that business, initially working with large mainframe systems. I was a software engineer, application developer, and manager, then transitioned and finally business development with Fortune 100 companies like FedEx, Bell South, Delta, and Home Depot. Then I worked as a church consultant for 12 years and finally in the senior healthcare industry for about 12 years, ending with a 6-month stint as an interim executive director of a nonprofit organization serving veterans. Between working in the computer industry and as a church consultant, I served for 5 years as chief of staff of a large nonprofit religious organization consisting of 6 501c3 corporations. The combined organization had 350 employees and served about 25,000 constituents. As primary consultant for the Aslan Group, I helped 32 churches and other nonprofit organizations clarify and communicate their mission, discover, plan, and implement their vision, and raise the funds necessary to accomplish their vision. I helped them raise over $60 million during those years. Currently, I serve on both the AVVBA and AVVBA Foundation boards. I also serve as board chair of the Atlanta Senior Care Network, a nonprofit organization of about 400 healthcare employees, professionals who serve seniors in the Atlanta area. In my spare time, I volunteer with United Military Care and do some business consulting with a few senior healthcare companies and organizations. Susie is my beautiful, patient, and tolerant wife of 41 years. She and I have an amazing 32-year-old son who lives in the Atlanta area. Jonathan was the operating co-owner of Buckhead Saloon until it burned to the ground about 2 months ago. Now he's in the process of opening a couple of smoke shops, one in Athens and one in Birmingham. You can't make this stuff up, folks. He's engaged to Courtney, who he's been dating for several years, and we will know when they're actually getting married when they tell us, hopefully at least a few days before the wedding. I am very blessed to have 2 awesome daughters, 2 terrific sons-in-law, 3 beautiful granddaughters, and 1 handsome and brilliant grandson who all live in the Kansas City area. My grandson's a high school senior planning on a career in healthcare. One of my granddaughters is a college freshman on a gymnastics scholarship planning to be a CPA, strangely enough. Sorry, David, I just said that. The other 2 of my granddaughters are in nursing school at my alma mater at Pittsburgh State University. One of them is on a cheer scholarship and is her cheer team's co-captain. I am very grateful to be your brother as a fellow member of this wonderful and unique organization. Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Cary King.
There was a judge I used to try cases in front of, and judges make announcements, right, Jackson? And he would say, how long is this going to take, Mr. King? And I'd say 3 hours. And he'd say, is that lawyer time or real time? My name is Cary King. I am from Atlanta. I was born at Georgia Baptist Hospital, which is strange since I was Jewish. I'm sure they didn't tell anybody that. My wife, Sherry, was also born in Atlanta. She was born at Piedmont Hospital, not the same one that exists now, but one back then. I attended both elementary school, high school, and college all in Atlanta initially, and ultimately law school in Atlanta as well. I went to 4 different elementary schools. I'm not sure whether I was getting thrown out or whether my father just kept moving us. I've never known which one. I went to Grady High School with my best friend Larry Taylor, who's somewhere back there hiding, I believe, who carried his own chair in, by the way, to the table for a general officer. I thought that was pretty phenomenal. Thought I would mention it. My parents were, my father was a first-generation American. He was born in Cape Town, South Africa. Both of my grandparents, or all of my grandparents, left Eastern Europe somewhere in the early 1900s before the Bolshevik Revolution. I think they smelled something coming. My father and mother together were initially in the jewelry business, and they did that for a few years. And his hope for me was that someday I would become a lawyer. Probably more of his hope than my hope at the time he was deciding that. My father was in sales and ultimately started off as a salesman with a company and eventually became president of that company, a company called Capital Foods. Some of you from Atlanta may remember that company. And my father ultimately became president of that company. It was the largest independent food distributorship in the country that I'm aware of. My mother was a secretary, so in the years when I was growing up, we had somebody kind of watching my brother and I, and I'll tell you about him in a second, but basically because my mother worked all the time, and she told me, when you go in the Army now, don't tell anybody that I'm a lousy cook. And the only way you can do that is by saying that the food in the mess hall is terrible. Don't admit that you're cooking, you tell them your food at home was much better. So she was always self-conscious about not being a great cook. I have a brother, he's 76 years old. He is a retired director of Bell South. He is my younger brother. I was born in 1941, which makes me slightly under 100 somewhere. I turned 81 in June. And my wife and I, Sherry and I, we're second marriage. We have a total of 5 children. So I have, my son is my law partner. My daughter is a nurse at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I have 3 stepdaughters, one of whom passed away in July. And then we have the other 2. One lives in Florida and is a psychologist, and the other one is either an artist or a CPA. I'm not sure which. I don't even think she's sure which one. I have a couple of great son-in-laws, and I have 6 grandchildren, 3 boys and 3 girls, who know that their grandfather's the smartest guy in town, because I told them that every time they came over to my house. A little bit about where I kind of started. I really did want to be a lawyer when I was a young guy. And when I got out of... There we go. That's okay. Those pictures, by the way, that guy right there is out of uniform, I can see, because he's wearing a watch and a pen, both of which would be easy targets for a sniper. So I don't know what I was thinking that day, but I must have been at this point in a different assignment. But when I graduated from Georgia State University, which with Ham McDonald sitting back there, who was my battalion commander, by the way, in ROTC. When I graduated from there, I had been accepted at Emory Law School, and I started Emory Law School, but it was boring. I hated it. And I was there about 6 weeks and said, listen, I'm going to give up my deferment. Don't tell my parents. Don't tell my girlfriend. I'm going to say that that I made bad grades and they lifted my deferment. Instead, I voluntarily lifted the deferment with the understanding that after I finished a 3-year regular Army tour, I would come back and re-enter the law school, and they said I could. Unfortunately, the 3 years became 7.5 years active duty, including 21 months in Vietnam. So I didn't get back to law school until I was 36 years old. A little bit about my military service. I was commissioned through ROTC, and originally was commissioned with an MOS of artillery, and I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which you've heard about today. And it was very much the way Skip described it. If you were not artillery, and if you were artillery, you could really enjoy yourself and have a good time. A lot of hip shoots, a lot of forward observer training. And when I got out of there, I started jump school and then injured myself in jump school, so they shipped me on to Germany to my unit, the 2nd Battalion, 83rd Artillery, which was part of a group called the 212th Artillery Group, where I started off as a forward observer, and later on you go through the progression of everything, ultimately ending up as a battery commander in an 8-inch SP unit. Then I got orders for Vietnam. I got to Vietnam, and I skipped something. When I got orders to go to Vietnam, I got to New York, and they said, I'm sorry, you've been diverted. You're not going to Vietnam now, which naturally the Army, everybody wanted to go or didn't want to go. I think there were more that did want to go than did. And so they decided, because I wanted to go, that I should go somewhere else. So they sent me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which, God help you if you've ever had to be there. It is the end of the earth. The closest thing there is the Lake of the Ozarks, which is worth anything, or Rolla, Missouri, if you want to go shopping and go to the drugstore, which is about the only thing you could buy there. In any event, what happened is I volunteered again to go to Vietnam, and this time somebody woke up. My daughter was born April 5th, 1967. Within 2 weeks after that, I got orders to Vietnam. I reported into the 1st Infantry Division, and the AG was a guy that was at Georgia State, ROTC, that I knew. And he said, I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, what's that? He said, well, the good news is you're going to stay here at Zion Base Camp for a few days so you can, get used to everything. You can get your patches sewn on and all that. I said, well, what's the bad news? He said, the bad news is you've been detailed to the infantry. And I said, wait a minute, I'm a captain and I'm just done all this artillery training. I don't remember much about the infantry. They said, oh, well, you'll learn. So then I find out that a company commander was killed at Loch Ninh the day before I got there. And so somebody that night saw that there was a captain coming in, and they needed a captain in the 2nd and 28th Infantry, and guess who that was? So I got my stuff unpacked. I was introduced to the brigade commander, and a chopper came down from Loch Ninh and picked me up. I hadn't even been able to get into the uniform and understand anything about Vietnam at that point. I was immediately shipped to Loch Ninh, which had been involved in a heavy 6-day battle. I got there, well, actually it was 4 days when I got there. I told you the company commander had been killed, so I was given that job. And I took over the company, and I said to the first sergeant, if you guys can keep me alive for 30 days, I think I'll survive over here. But in the meantime, I'm not an infantryman originally. They said, oh, you will be, sir. Don't worry about it. And sure enough, that night we got hit, and the next night we got hit, and the next night after that, I got it. I got it, Art. Go sit down. You're not in charge of the time. I'm talking. So the bottom line is that I served with 2nd and 28th for a couple of months in some pretty hairy situations until the S2 got killed at 2nd Brigade, and I was pulled out of the field and assigned as S2 of 2nd Brigade. So that was my initial tour, all with the infantry, and then I extended in order to get a 105 battery. I stayed in the Army, so that's basically it. I stayed in the Army for about 7.5 years, considered making it a career, but my ex-wife didn't think it was a great career for me and pressured me until I got out. I had 2 kids at that point. When I got out of the Army, which was 7 years later, I got out in 1970, I decided that I better just get a job somewhere. I had 2 kids and a wife. My father hired me to go to work for him at the food company, and I did that for a few years until when I was 36, I decided I'd gotten a divorce, and I decided it was time for me to go back to my original goal, which was law school. So I went back to law school, but I couldn't go in the daytime because I had to make a living. So I had to go at night, 3 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for 3.5 years. Eventually got sworn in, and developed some great friendships in the legal profession. I've been practicing law now 41 years. Sherry and I have been married the same amount of time. So she and my law school career started at the same time, although she and I grew up together. I want to just mention, so that's kind of my story, and I thought I was going to retire in October 2019, and they dragged me back into the firm. I practice law with my son, who is the senior partner with the firm. It just doesn't like my picture. It just keeps kicking it out. I got it. I want to tell you something. The one thing I love about this organization is that it's always been about veterans. It's never been about us individually or what we did, whatever. It's good to know what we all do, but it's really about us helping a greater community. Since I've been a member of this organization, I started a pro bono clinic at the VA Medical Center. I volunteered at the USO, and I still do. I volunteered for the Legacy Program at the History Center, and a multitude of things that involve veterans. This is the best bunch of people and the best organization as far as doing the right thing by veterans. And that's what I would like you, rather than take away anything about me, except I've already laid it all out there, you got it. But I will tell you this, you will not find a less cliquey, if you let yourself get into this group, you will not find a better bunch of guys that exist in this group. Thank you.
Okay, and our final presentation is going to be from AVV Director Clyde Romero. Clyde's going to tell us a little bit about his life and all, and then he is going to be presented with a very prestigious award by the FAA. It's called the Wright Brothers Award for 50 years of safe flying, and Jim Chaney is going to be here to present that to him. So Clyde, come on up. I'm going to try and make this computer go to the next slide if I can. There you go.
I'm going to be a lot shorter than most of these other individuals. My name is Clarence John Romero, Jr. I'm known as Clyde, and I was told during my last classified security renewal that I was one of the few people in the system that had an authorized nickname, Clyde. I'm from New York City. Yes, I'm a Yankee. Katz, thank you, wherever you're at. Thank you. You can't help where you're from and who your relatives are. I have one daughter from a previous marriage and 2 grandkids that live in New Orleans. I enlisted in the United States Army at 19 to become a helicopter pilot during Vietnam. The picture with the helicopters behind me is during Quezon, during Lamson 719. I'm a Lamson 719 survivor. I'm one of the few combatants that legally fought in Cambodia, May of 1970, when Nixon sent us in there. I was with the 25th Infantry Division at that time, flying out of Cú Chi. And then when the 25th went home, I got a chance to go to the 101st Division up in I Corps and go to Lamson 719. So I flew in both theaters of operation legally, Cambodia and Laos. I'm the former president of the VHP Helicopter Pilot Association 2015-2016. I was a scout pilot, and I was shot down and wounded several times. In fact, I arrived in country April 17th, 1970. I was still pissing stateside water when I got shot down. That's how close, during May. I subsequently joined the United States Air Force flying F-4 Phantoms. I got tired of getting shot down at 90 knots. One of my specialties was to analyze Soviet weapons platforms during the Cold War, and most of my work in the United States Air Force was highly classified. Those of you who saw my ManPads briefing can see that. I retired from the Air National Guard in 1992 after we went to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. That was a religious experience as well. In between my active duty career, I joined the airlines and I became a pilot for American Airlines, and I retired there in 2015. I'd like to say I can fly anything I can see on the ramp, which is helicopters and fixed wing, which is the truth. I'm proud to be a member of the AVVBA and to be on the board of directors of such a distinguished group of individuals. I look forward to serving on the board for as long as they will have me. Thank you.